Welcome to the podcast, Let's Talk PWS, a series all about Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm Susie.
And I'm Katie. Let's start talking.
Welcome, listeners. Welcome to episode 7. We've got a huge topic to discuss tonight, advocacy. When we think about advocacy, we can think about it in two ways, the big A of advocacy and the little a of advocacy. Katie's quite the expert on defining the difference on this. So, Katie, why don't you just explain to our listeners what the difference is?
And I'd like to thank Liz, our guest, because it's actually her definition that we're going to read today, and it's really expanded this topic. So, big A advocacy, which encompasses strategic organised actions aimed at changing policies, procedures, or legislation with a goal of long-term structural or systemic improvements. And then there's little a advocacy, which encompasses actions that advocate for rights and needs, often in daily interactions, with the goal of immediate individual or local improvement. Both are equally powerful and complementary, and little a advocacy can build the foundation for big A advocacy initiatives. PWSA is active in big A advocacy through its role in a DRO. What is a DRO, I hear you ask? Well, DRO stands for Disability Representative Organisation. DROs are national disability advocacy bodies funded by the Australian Government. DROs are led by people with disabilities and their supporters. DROs provide direct input into NDIS policy, legislation and reform. They provide system-level advocacy. There are 12 DROs in the national program, each with a different theme. The theme could be a type of impairment like intellectual disability or a cohort characteristic like children and young people. Each DRO shares the views with their government about issues related to their theme. This is advocacy at the system level. The idea is to ensure government reforms such as the new NDIS support lists and support needs assessment models are inclusive, fair and protect participant rights. The DRO organisations also give the government advice to reduce barriers and improve social and economic participation. They work with a range of ministers and government areas to do this. If you want to learn more about the DRO program in general, go to the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing website. As I mentioned, each DRO represents a particular theme. Our DRO is actually a consortium. This consortium is an important partnership between PWSA and other like-minded disability organisations. The consortium gives us a stronger voice with ministers, the NDIA, regulators and government departments. The consortium has a very specific theme. It's about intellectual dysfunction caused by chromosomal variations or learning limitations. People with these chromosomal variations experience intellectual disability varying from mild to severe. The variation is accompanied by degrees of physical disability, higher rates of co-occurring neurodevelopmental conditions, communication disabilities and health issues. People with these disabilities need decision-making support to one level or another. PWSA believes that the NDIA and other government bodies need to hear more about complexity of living with a cognitive, intellectual or neurological impairment. Our consortium is led by Down Syndrome Australia. We are a collective of 8 disability organisations formed into a consortium. Each of the 8 represents people with disabilities that affect the acquisition of knowledge and skills. This includes various neurodevelopmental conditions affecting intellectual processes, educational attainment, and the acquisition of skills needed for independent living and social functioning. The focus of our consortium is to ensure the issues experienced by its members are heard in all relevant forums where policy is developed, guidelines are formed, and services designed. PWSA and the consortium put forward recommendations about how the NDIA and other relevant bodies can improve their interactions with and service delivery to people with these thinking impairments. There's more information about our consortium and its members on the DRO Leaders website, and we will put that in the chat. Over the past 12 months, our consortium has been advocating on a wide range of topics. These include the following: new framework planning, disability safeguards, Disabilities Discrimination Act review, sexual and reproductive health monitoring framework and data strategy, Thriving Kids Initiative, Community Visitors Scheme, Arts and Screen Employment Pathways Pilot Program, Economic Reform Roundtable, Anti-Bullying Review, Dementia and Ageing, and the NDIS impairment categories and notices. The list of consortium submissions is located on this DRO's Leaders website at Down Syndrome Australia. PWSA looks forward to continuing its systemic advocacy for people living with PWS and their families, both with the consortium and independently as PWSA. If you want to know more or become involved in this type of advocacy, please contact PWSA. In addition, keep a lookout on our Facebook pages to contribute to the latest topics affecting our PWS community. So now we're going to talk about advocacy with a little a.
Yes. Wow. Thank you, Katie, for sharing what all that means. It's really quite daunting when you think about it. And when we think about how complex our priority loved ones are, it's just, it seems like the battle is endless. I mean, I'd love to hear from you, and let's welcome Liz Patterson. Liz, like other PWS parents, she's been very, very active in the small advocacy world, but it's a lot of work, I'm sure. She's also a author of a book called Despair for Today and Hope for Tomorrow, something we all hang on to. Love to hear your journey about your son, James, and the advocacy work that you've done in this space.
Thanks. Yes. Yes, I think in the last podcast we talked a bit about the book and why I wrote that. And I think, we've all had experience of advocacy, I think every one of us, perhaps not realising what we're actually doing. And in my book, I've got a few different experiences where I had to advocate strongly for my son. And I thought I could just read you a couple of the vignettes about this and then tell you where it went from there.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so the first one was back when James was quite young, and this is when he went from primary school to mainstream secondary school. He was in a special education unit within a mainstream secondary school. Now, this vignette describes an experience I had. It's 1995 and I'm sitting in a parents and citizens meeting at Merrimack State High School on the Gold Coast next to another mother, Lynn, whose son, like James, was enrolled in the special education unit of this school. The meeting had been convened to discuss issues that Lynn and I had raised about the lack of inclusion of our sons in any mainstream activities of the school. The discussion had not long started when a teacher from the mainstream section of the school proclaimed in a very loud and angry voice, "We have enough kids to deal with in our classes who are not quite thick enough to be in the SEU without having to deal with your lot."
Unbelievable.
So you can imagine what... So fortunately, having Lynn with me too, we advocated very strongly for our sons to be included in mainstream education. We actually contacted the education department and we went to the media and we had a story written about it and we were able to get some of their policies changed within the school. So things did improve after that, even though James ended up being transferred to a special school because it was all too slow a process. But what I really learnt from that was really choosing your allies, having somebody else that can support you, getting as much information as you can about what the situation is, what the policies are and all of those sorts of things, really checking your facts, and then trying to be as objective as you can, even though you feel very emotional about all these things. You need to be objective and stick to the facts, I think.
Which is a real
and
challenge when you're a mother.
It is. It is.
So who would your allies be?
Well, in that case, it was another parent. The media helped, but I also found somebody within the education department who was a fairly strong ally and was able to point me in the direction of the policies and the guidelines, and where the school had not met the human rights of the students in this special unit.
And therein lies a key point, because the intricacies within the bureaucracy of it all and the lack of understanding makes it so complicated to get the end result, and all we want is inclusion
That's
and
right.
respect and consideration.
Yes. That was one example. Another one was actually when James was 33 and I had been trying to get him on the list for supported accommodation within the Department of Health and Human Services. Tried and tried and tried with no success whatsoever. James was in an acute psychiatric unit at this time, and I had had other parents say to me, this is your chance to get him into accommodation. You have to be really firm, stand your ground. So this is the vignette I've written about that. It is a morning in mid-December in 2013, and I'm sitting in a family meeting room of the acute psychiatric unit of a major Melbourne hospital with my sister Sue and a social worker. The social worker says, James needs to be discharged because the doctors say there is nothing more they can do for him as an inpatient. With a very breathless and shaky voice, I respond with, he doesn't have an address to be discharged to, so he needs to stay here until the Department of Health and Human Services find him suitable supported accommodation. I couldn't have stood my ground without the support of my sister and the rehearsed dialogue. Aged 32, James had been admitted via the emergency department to an acute psychiatric unit for the fourth time after a year of unrelenting psychosis, despite many antipsychotic medication changes. So this brought about a situation of me, in reality, saying I was relinquishing his care because the Victorian government at that time could not offer any other support. I think I was getting about 2 hours a week of carer respite, and that was it. And James had become just too unwell to be at home. But that was a situation, it was extremely difficult. They kept telling me there weren't any vacancies within any of the houses. Then all of a sudden they came up with a vacancy. I went to see it with my sister. It was a derelict, abandoned house. And they said, we might take a few days to get support workers to be able to look after him here. And I'm sure they thought, there's no way she's going to accept this. And I wasn't going to, but my sister said, stand your ground. So I did. And I said, sure, we'll take this and we'll get friends from our church to come and renovate it. And they were a bit taken aback, I think. The next day, they suddenly came up with another house that had had a vacancy for 6 months.
That is really interesting about standing your ground and being expected as, with all due respect, we're all aging parents, and the expectation that, we should continue doing the support when there is NDIS, there's other government avenues that we can possibly take to seek that support. We pay our taxes. Why is this so hard? Why does advocacy have to be so hard?
Yeah, no. Can be very, very difficult. And then the last one I probably want to talk about, there's been many, heaps of them, but one where my son's in a supported independent living situation with a big major provider of SIL. He had a trained, accredited support dog that he'd had for years. And one day, we think, a casual support worker reported to the RSPCA that James's dog was being mistreated. They came to the house. They told the support workers that they could be individually and corporately prosecuted if they found any evidence of the dog being mistreated. So with that, the SIL provider removed the dog without our permission, really, and said they needed to do risk assessments and all of those sorts of things. If you want to, you can read the whole story in the book. There's a whole chapter about it. But it actually took 6 months until we got the dog back into the house Turned out the dog actually had a neurological condition, so that when she was touched around the neck, she yelped. We found that out at the time, so she wasn't being mistreated. But it ended up I had to go to the Quality and Safeguards Commission with quite a lengthy complaint.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that ended up sort of okay in the end. I guess the good outcome from that was that this particular SIL provider then developed policies and protocols and care plans
Mm-hmm.
for animals within houses. They had nothing before that. And so the dog Penny was actually allowed back in the house, but it was 6 months that he was separated from her. And through that process, I think, like a lot of people who become whistleblowers or really advocate strongly, you become the victim. You become the scapegoat. And so I went through a very difficult process with that. Had to go to mediation, all sorts of things. But yeah, so advocacy is not easy.
No.
It's worthwhile when you get the outcome you want, but the downside of it can be very detrimental to your own health and well-being. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think that's when you need to have a community of support around you, allies.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really have to have your evidence right. You need to be knowledgeable. You need to find out as much information as you can. And I think every one of us have experienced when something's happened to our sons or daughters, that emotional rush of anger, disappointment, frustration, sadness. Wait, you've got to put that to one side,
But that's
not
so difficult.
react on that,
Mm-hmm.
and try and be as logical and rational as you can through the whole advocacy process. So not easy, but worthwhile. And I think the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah, because advocacy is like taking new ground. So you're forging a way, you're trailblazing. So it's an unknown, and so it is hard work. But thank you for the advocacy that you've done, because it's made a difference for our kids who come after.
Oh, good. Hope so, yes.
So Liz, how do our viewers get your book?
You can get it through Amazon and Booktopia. I think they're fairly quick with deliveries, and the proceeds are going to the Prader-Willi Research Foundation.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Liz. That's a topic that we can talk for hours on end, I'm sure. Thank you very much for coming. And that was episode 7 on Let's Talk PWS, and we'll see you for the next episode.
As we close tonight, don't forget to sign up as members at pws.org.au, where you'll also find ways to donate and sponsor our various projects and initiatives. Please remember to like, follow and share us on our socials. And until next week, let's keep talking.